As many have told us, it is broken.
We'll hear from the commissioner of that report on her recommendations just ahead. Plus, Canada's working full steam ahead on diversifying its trade relationships. Prime Minister Mark Carney and several of his top ministers crisscrossed around the globe this week as part of the government's efforts to steer away from its reliance on U.S. trade. But some say Carney's not doing enough. Conservative trade critic Adam Chambers will join us for that conversation. And Russia launched another brutal attack on Ukraine's capital overnight. The strikes killed at least 18 people, including 4 children. Canada has condemned the attack and announced increased sanctions on Russia. We'll get reaction from the Canadian-Ukrainian Congress. Power and Politics starts right now. Sport in Canada is broken and in crisis. Those are the findings of a new report released today, written by a commission Ottawa created to look at the future of sport in Canada amid allegations of systemic abuse. The report says the issues in Canada are as profound as they are numerous and include a problematic focus on high performance, a lack of protection for children, and the commodification of some athletes. The report concludes that Canadian sport has lost its way and that it's evidenced in horrific instances of abuse. Joining me now is the Commissioner of the Future of Sport in Canada Commission, Lise Maisonneuve. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming in.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I found the opening lines of your report quite jarring. You say the Canadian sport world is in crisis and many have told us it's broken. Why did you write that?
Well, I've had the privilege to meet numerous people involved in the sports system. We met victims, we met survivors, we met athletes, we met coaches, we met parents, we met academics, we met experts, and the list goes on. And we met, as you can see in the report, we met over 825 people at the time of the writing of the report. The engagement process is still ongoing at this point in time, as our work is not finished. And they provided to us a great deal of information that clearly indicates that the system is broken. And we identify some of those issues in the preliminary report and what needs to happen to fix the system.
You document a long list of alleged wrongdoing in sport. There has been issues in hockey, rugby, boxing, water polo, gymnastics, right? There's many instances of this just over the last 6 years in this report that you've detailed. Why is there so much abuse? What is going on here? There's
abuse because of the culture that exists in sport today. Many have explained to us that, there are many factors. There's the factors of lack of financing. Lack of financing leads to poor governance. Poor governance leads to no tools to deal with the potential abuse, no tools to create prevention tools to be able to make sure that abuse doesn't take place. And there's many, many facets as to why the system is broken and why the abuse takes place. There's also a culture of silencing. I've talked about that in the report. And
that protects perpetrators, right?
Protects perpetrators, and it's not easy. It's not easy to disclose. It's not easy for the victims and the survivors to come forward. Even in our commission that was trauma-informed, and that still is trauma-informed, people were resistant in coming forward and speaking to us, and it took a great deal of courage for them to come forward and to share with us some very difficult personal circumstances.
Is there something about the structure of Canadian sport that allowed that culture to come about and persist?
There is really no structure. That's the problem. And one of the things that we find in our report is that when dealing with complaints mechanism of maltreatment or of abuse, the systems differ remarkably from one province to the other, from one sport to another. There's no uniformity. People don't know where to go. People don't know what is the system where they can complain, and as a result, this creates an incredible pressure and more trauma for those people.
As you said, you heard a lot of heartbreaking stories of abuse, maltreatment. I know there's no silver bullet to solutions like this, but is there one thing the federal government can do to at least alleviate the situation? What can Ottawa do now to make the culture better?
So we identify a few things in our report to make the culture better, but there's one thing that people need to understand. This is going to take collaboration. This does not fall totally on the federal government. This is going to take the provinces, territories, the national sport organizations, the provincial sport organization, territorial sport organization, Indigenous sport organization to come together and collaborate. But one thing that is clear, people want to collaborate. And people want to fix this because Canadians truly care. And I think we need to mention here that there's been a lot of good work done. And there's been, and the momentum is there. Now it's to build on it.
Your report also criticizes the win at all costs attitude that's kind of been perpetrated by the Own the Podium program in particular, which is something that the federal government stood up in advance of the Vancouver Olympics to get our Olympians at the top of the podium, as the name suggests. But that's sort of a popular program in a way, right? Like, to be crass about it, Canadians want to see their Olympians do well,
Absolutely.
right? They want to see, like, there's a big point of national pride when you see these medalists on the podium, and it has had some success. I was looking back through the records, like, we had 12 medals in Athens in 2004 in the Summer Olympic Games. Last year in Paris, we had 27. It has produced results. How do you balance, pursuit of high performance and medals with some of the equity issues that you uncovered with those sort of programs?
If we render sport more accessible in our country, you will have more athletes to pick from at that level. And don't get us wrong, medals are truly important and we must continue. And we must continue to shine as a country on the podium. And that's really important, and it does unite Canadians. Every time there's an Olympic season, we're all watching TV together and cheering for our favorite athletes. But Canada needs to find a way to do both. We need to get to the grassroots and we need to win well. That's the difference, because you can have the medals around your neck without the maltreatment and deal with the issues that we've identified in our report.
Given some of those issues you've uncovered, would you feel comfortable putting your child in Canadian sports as the system is right now?
Yes, I would.
Why is that?
Yes, I would. I would watch. I would probably be on the sidelines. I would, because there's still a great deal of good that comes out of Canadian sport. We've heard the benefits of the sports system, and we outline those in our report. There's some people who have told us that it actually saved their lives. There's some people that told them that it made them feel included in our Canadian society. So sport done well is a great thing. And there is some sport that is being done well, and there's a lot of good coming out of sport.
All right, let's leave it there. Commissioner Lise Maisonneuve, appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Prime Minister Mark Carney says his government is focused on diversifying Canada's trade and security partnerships amid a trade war with the U.S. The Power Panel will join us to discuss Canada's efforts later this hour. But first, we'll hear from the Conservative Party, which says Carney's international trips are just show business. Conservative trade critic Adam Chambers is with us just ahead. Stay with us. A Russian attack on Kyiv has killed at least 18 people, including several children. Strikes hit more than 20 locations overnight, severely damaging a residential block and the European Union mission. It was one of the heaviest attacks on the capital since Russia launched their invasion in 2022. In response, Canada has imposed sanctions against 16 individuals and 2 entities for their role in Russian interference activity. Here with me is Ihor Mikulchichin, CEO of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming in. How are people feeling in Ukraine today?
It's a day of mourning in Ukraine, an unprecedented attack, as you hear. They're still pulling bodies out of the rubble. Downtown Kyiv was struck, regions were struck. It is unfortunately a normal and regular part of the day for Ukrainians to wake up in Canada and check in on the news and hear what's happened, but this is a very devastating one, and particularly in context of the so-called peace talks that President Trump has wanted to have. It's pretty clear Russia doesn't want peace.
And the strike hit right after the U.S. Special Envoy, Keith Kellogg, had finished up his visit there.
Right.
Do you think that timing is coincidental? What's going on there? Is Putin, testing President Trump's limits with an attack like this?
I don't think any of this is coincidental. It's all the targets are specific, as you mentioned in your lead up, that they're going after the EU, the British Council, hospitals, specific military installations. But in this case, this is civilians. This is not military targets. We've seen every kind of building attacked in the last few years. So it is deliberate. It is done premeditated, and we know that Russia is very cynical about this kind of timing. The other particular awful thing that they do is that they do a double tap, which is they send rockets and missiles, and then half an hour, 40 minutes later, when they know first responders are there, they'll send a second round and slaughter everybody who's showed up, particularly journalists who are there covering the event.
Prime Minister Carney called it murder today in his statement. Is that appropriate?
Definitely. I mean, we think that the Russian invasion, which is a war, there are war crimes. There have been mass graves. There have been thousands of accounts of horror perpetrated on individuals and communities. Every day Russia perpetrates and murders Ukrainians, and every day we say Russia is a terrorist state, and today is more evidence of it.
Do you think President Trump will be able to broker a peace deal? You mentioned that the Russians are really not showing any sign that they're open to peace if they're carrying out attacks like this. But do you have any faith in President Trump's peacemaking abilities?
I think it's very clear that Putin is playing with everyone who wants to pretend to engage in peace negotiations. We saw that before the full-scale invasion in 2022, that Putin spent weeks wasting time of diplomats trying to engage in some kind of peace talks. I think it's very clear what Russia really wants, which is territorial, Ukrainian territory, a quarter, a half, whatever they decide in the particular day. They are not withdrawing. They're pushing forward militarily, and they continue these attacks. So I don't think anyone, other than taking some strong measures against the Russian state, which is what we've hoped President Trump would do, to take these unprecedented sanctions and unprecedented measures, which we haven't seen. That is the only thing that we think will stop the Russians from continuing this invasion.
I know it's hard to think about the post-war period right now, but we haven't spoken to you, I don't think, since Prime Minister Carney suggested over the weekend that Canada is prepared to put troops in Ukraine to protect peace if that comes together. What is your reaction to that? Do you think that that's a prudent move by Canada?
Definitely. We've been supportive of it. I think he's referring mostly to Operation Unifier, which is a training mission, the long-standing training mission, which Canada has been engaged in since 2014. Thousands of Ukrainian troops, I think 30,000 plus, have been trained by Canadians in Ukraine and then now in the United Kingdom and Poland. So we would be happy to see that training mission return closer to Ukraine and in Ukraine. We're happy to see Canada and Prime Minister Carney engage directly with Ukraine with that visit that was significant but also real and tangible. And unfortunately, I don't think there will be a quick end to this, because Putin is not being held accountable by President Trump or anybody else. And he will, on a daily basis, unfortunately, unleash terror on Ukrainian civilians at will.
We did hear today from the federal government that there's more sanctions coming against some Russian officials. Is that enough?
Nothing is enough. I think there are There are sanctions on economics. Somehow there's sanctions on North Korea and Iran, and yet those countries are sending soldiers and drones to Russia to shoot Ukrainians. So I'm always skeptical about the impact of sanctions. I mean, of course, they need to be there. They need to be strongly enforced. But if they're not coordinated internationally, then they're not as effective as they could be. So I mean, we're hopeful that the international community, particularly the EU, now realizes that this is, a direct hit from Putin on them, and that they work with Canada to strengthen every possible way to take Russia and its economy down. But given the oil that Russia continues to sell to fuel this war, I don't know how that will work.
All right, let's leave it there. Ihor Mikulchichin, CEO of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming in. It's been a week of globetrotting for the Prime Minister and his cabinet as they seek to diversify on trade and security in the face of U.S. uncertainty. Mark Carney and some of his top ministers just wrapped up a tour through Poland, Germany, and Latvia yesterday, and the International Trade Minister is still in South America on his trip to Brazil and Colombia. There's been lots of handshakes, but as these trips produce broad agreements without dollar values attached, what have they really done to secure Canada's trade future? Adam Chambers is the Conservative international trade critic, and he joins me now. Hi, sir. Thanks for coming on. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me here, JP.
So the Prime Minister signed agreements with Poland, Germany, and Latvia during his swing through Europe. He's trying to open up new markets with the Canada-U.S. relationship on shaky ground. But the Conservatives, I take it, are not giving this trip very good reviews. Tell me why.
Well, look, I would say I've been around politicians long enough to judge them by what they do, not just by what they say. And, Mr. Carney ran during the election saying that Canada had to act faster than we've ever acted before. And yet, we're seeing lots of words. But as you mentioned in the lead in here, no dollar values, not a lot of substance in what we say. So while some people may find these actions promising, I think we'll reserve judgment until we actually see some substance and some meat on the bone.
Pierre Poilievre said yesterday that essentially nothing had been accomplished in Germany by the Prime Minister, but we saw that ruffled the feathers a little bit of the German ambassador. I don't know if you saw this, but he took to social media to gently chastise Mr. Poilievre, and he says that there was progress made in jointly developing Canada's critical minerals, and that, that's, quote, far from nothing. What's your message to the Germans who are a little peeved?
Well, actually, I feel a little bit sorry for the Germans in that, it wasn't that long ago the Chancellor was over visiting former Prime Minister Trudeau, and we sent him home empty-handed, saying that there wasn't a business case for LNG. And now the Liberal government has flip-flopped on itself and reversed this decision. So in one way, I think it's encouraging that we're realizing that we should be selling LNG to Europe. But I recognize that the Germans are in a little bit of a difficult spot because not that long ago, this Liberal government had the exact opposite position that it seems to have today.
Yeah, of course. Prime Minister Trudeau saying there's no business case. I've had the German ambassador on this week. I've had the Polish ambassador on this week, and both said they are very much open to Canadian LNG. And the Prime Minister has changed his tune. At least this is a different kind of Liberal, if you will, because he says he's willing to supply an energy-hungry Europe with LNG. He says there are enormous opportunities to develop LNG in this country, a lot different than what we heard from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Are you happy about that about-face?
Well, look, as I said previously, I think we have to judge a government by its actions, and we haven't yet seen anything announced in terms of being able to deliver LNG to Europe. I mean, they're begging for it. In fact, they say they even buy discounted LNG through America. So, it's nice that we're hearing some things from the Liberal government that seem different than Prime Minister Trudeau, but we actually haven't seen much in the way of anything being delivered or concretely suggested that would give us some comfort that we're actually going to be able to secure these deals. And so that's what's important for us. Conservatives have been consistent for the last decade that we need to be selling our energy to the world, by the way, cleaner energy to the world. Canadian LNG is much cleaner than some LNG you can get in other parts of the world, and certainly much better than getting it from countries like Russia.
Mr. Poilievre also panned the Prime Minister's decision to lift some of the retaliatory tariffs last week. He says, if he was in charge, he would put in countermeasures on the Americans. Do you support hitting the U.S. with more tariffs?
Well, if we look at Mr. Carney's rhetoric during the campaign, and then we judge him by what his actions have been since the campaign, it's basically the complete opposite of what he promised Canadians during the campaign. He campaigned on, we'll have our elbows up, we're going to drop our gloves when someone challenges us. But every single decision that Prime Minister Carney has made since the campaign has been completely the opposite. He has given many concessions to the Americans, yet it is unclear whether we've gotten anything in return. Maybe that's why President Trump basically endorsed Mr. Carney during the campaign and said he didn't really like Pierre Poilievre that much because we would have been maybe more difficult to negotiate with.
But do you support tariffs? Do you think that's a prudent approach?
JP, I think you have to, we're not at the negotiating table currently. We don't know what's going on. Is it possible that the only way to get Americans talking to Canadians again was to reverse the tariffs? I'm not sure. But we have to look at the entirety of the deal when we do see a deal to judge Mr. Carney on whether he's able to secure one. I mean, Mr. Carney said he wanted the job. We had to hire, he said, hire me, hire the Liberal Party because we'll be able to negotiate to Donald Trump and stand up to him. Yet, his actions are not in keeping with that same promise.
As you have mentioned, there have been some concessions. We dropped the digital services tax. We did not match U.S. retaliatory tariffs on steel and aluminum and autos and lumber. And now we've just dropped the retaliatory tariffs on some of the other goods that we had in place. There have been concessions, and there hasn't been a deal. They blew past that August 1st deadline. There were some talks this week, but Dominic LeBlanc, the minister charged with negotiating this deal, left Washington earlier than planned. How soon does Mr. Carney have to come up with a deal to satisfy you, to show you that those concessions were worthwhile?
Well, to be fair to the government, negotiating with the Americans is not an easy task. They are, have picked battles and fights with many other countries. So, Mr. Carney has a tall task ahead of him. I do think, though, questions need to be asked about the extreme change in strategy. Was Mr. Carney even committed to tariffs in the first place? Did he mislead Canadians by saying he would have elbows up, knowing he was going to make concessions in the future? Or is this truly the only way that we could get the Americans talking to us again? But even if that is true, JP, we have to ask ourselves how we got here in the first place. Mr. Trump's actions and tariffs are unjustifiable and not in keeping with the spirit of NAFTA. That is the most important point. But the second is Liberals, senior Liberals who are still senior Liberal cabinet ministers, and even the Prime Minister himself and the former Liberal Prime Minister has spent the last 10 years actually harming the relationship with Americans, antagonizing them. You just mentioned the digital services tax. There's the global minimum tax. There's the electric vehicle mandate, which, by the way, there is no possible way that our government is going to be able to continue that, not just because it's antagonizing to the Americans, but because it's just absolutely nonsense policy for Canadians here at home. And these are actions that the Liberals have taken that haven't just antagonized Republicans. And President Biden warned very starkly against imposing a global minimum tax before the rest of the world did, and a digital services tax. He warned Mrs. Freeland of that when she was the finance minister. She is still a senior minister in the Liberal government. The Democrats warned the Liberals that this would be a problem for the relationship. Republicans have warned the Liberals that this would be a problem for the relationship. And the only bipartisan consensus in America right now is that the Canadian relationship with the Americans has been strained. So I think, we have to be self-reflective about how we got here. We need to figure out a way to get out together. Conservatives have mentioned to Mr. Carney, we've offered our hand of support, whatever we can do to help secure a deal, by the way, that Mr. Carney promised he could get, we would be willing to do. But I think it's still fair to ask questions as we go through this process. Why are we reversing the strategy? How did we get here in the first place? And how do we get out of it together?
All right, let's leave it there. Adam Chambers is the Conservative international trade critic. Appreciate your time, sir. Nice to see you.
Thanks, JP.
A former Alberta politician is pushing back against the separatist movement in his province. He started a petition to make it official policy for Alberta to stay in Canada. We'll speak to the former Alberta Deputy Premier Thomas Lukaszuk on his Forever Canadian project. Next, stay with us. Alberta's separation received applause last night at the latest town hall for Premier Danielle Smith's Alberta Next panel. And Smith repeated her stance that she supports a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada.
It's a matter of us trying to rewrite the rules so that we get the federal government back in its lane so we can be in our lane. That's what I'm working towards. If I have those said, that if either of the petition campaigns get enough signatures, that we absolutely will put it on the ballot and we'll let Albertans decide.
There's a proposed referendum question on separation making waves, and a judge will decide if it can go ahead. But there's another petition that could be put before voters. This one, it's pro-Canada, keeping Confederation as it is. Here's some photos of people signing on to that petition. The group behind it hopes to get 300,000 signatures by the end of October. Thomas Lukaszuk is a former Deputy Premier of Alberta and is the lead proponent of the Forever Canadian initiative. Thanks for coming on, sir. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So you're leading the charge to keep Alberta in Canada. Tell me why you're in this fight.
Well, a number of reasons. For me, my emotional attachment to Canada, as you can probably sense by my accent, I wasn't born here in 1982. My family has been given a chance leaving communist Poland. So every day I'm thankful to Canada, like many other refugees and immigrants. But there are many, less emotional reasons. Economics, for one. We know what happens to regions that discuss separatism and how that has a negative economic impact. We saw this in Quebec. We saw this with Brexit. We see it in the Basque region in Spain. So there are numerous reasons to make sure that this conversation about separatism is stopped and that we focus on more constructive things in Alberta politics.
You and your team are signing up tens of thousands of people, I gather. What's been the reaction when you approach them with a clipboard and ask them to stick with Canada?
You know what? It's amazing. We have awoken some kind of a sleeping giant. Now, today, as we're speaking, we have approximately 3,750 volunteers across this entire province collecting signatures. Today, there are 69 locations where you can sign this petition. And everywhere you create a location, there are lineups, people wanting to sign up for a variety of reasons, and they're of all political ideologies and ethnocultural groups and religious groups. There's this one unifying thing that they want to make sure that Alberta stays in Canada and that Alberta is a important member in our confederation. So it has turned into a movement when it was meant to be just a petition signature drive.
You mentioned off the top there that there is a potential economic cost of separation. Break that down for our audience. What could happen to Alberta if they do pull out of Confederation?
Well, first of all, just the discussion alone is damaging to not only Alberta's, but Canada's economy. We know that business obviously is looking for a good return on investment, but also is looking for stability and predictability. And in any jurisdiction where there is political turmoil, business tends to not want to stay or invest. I always use the example of the Bank of Montreal. There is a reason why their headquarters are in Toronto now and not in Montreal. They simply packed up and left. But there is no economic argument for Alberta becoming a separate state. We are a landlocked province. We are benefiting greatly from being part of Canada, both with exports and our reputation on international stage. The simple cost of setting up a new country is astronomical, and it is something that Albertans don't want. Albertans are proud Canadians, always have been. We always have differences with Ottawa and with other provinces, like all provinces do. But the beauty of Canada is that we are actually a country of continuous negotiation. But what sets us apart from most countries in the world is that we do this in a very civil way, that there are means to negotiate our differences. And that's what makes us a G7 country. That's what makes us so successful. So threatening separation and having discussions with the United States to annex the United States is simply not constructive. It's not what the vast majority of Albertans want. And I simply gave Albertans a voice to express their opinion, and they're saying loud and clear that they want nothing to do with this.
The vast majority don't support it, but there is sort of a vocal minority, right? In the last poll that we had from CBC, we found about 30% of Albertans surveyed say the province would be better off if it separated. What do you say to those Albertans who are feeling dejected and frustrated with the status quo?
Well, first of all, the 30% is an overestimate. There are people who are musing about those things, but when it actually comes, if you ask a question, would you be willing to separate today? Most will say no. But I don't discount their feelings, and nor do I need to validate their feelings. Obviously, they're disenchanted with status quo. They're not happy with Ottawa. But this is the same group also that was opposing vaccinations, that was opposing COVID restrictions, that was opposing gun control by federal government. It tends to be the same cohort that is simply dissatisfied with the status quo in Canada, which obviously is overlaid over Alberta. We need to do a better job as politicians to embrace those individuals. Maybe we need to better explain the benefits of being Canadian and how admired Canada is internationally, and how well we are doing economically compared to most Western countries, maybe we haven't done a good job doing that. So that is the next step. Once we set aside this not constructive at all conversation about separation, maybe we need to learn how to better communicate the benefits of being Canadian and how these problems are actually being resolved one by one.
The Premier, Danielle Smith, says she's against separation, but she hasn't signed your petition. She's declined to do it to this point. Does it bother you that she's holding off signing on to this initiative to keep Alberta in Canada?
It doesn't bother me. It would be just another signature on our petition. But I question Premier Danielle Smith's statement that she is against separation, while she's actually just retained a law firm to support the separatists in court, where they are fighting to have a petition of their own. Our Premier is sort of walking a very uncomfortable thin line where she wants to appease the separatists by assisting them in many ways, but at the same time saying that she believes in sovereign Alberta within United Canada, whatever that means. But no, she will not come out right and endorse our petition drive, nor will she say that she is against it.
All right, let's leave it there. Thomas Lukazik with the Forever Canada Initiative. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
The Prime Minister is home from his European tour. Have Carney and his ministers done enough to expand global trading partnerships for Canada? The Power Panel is here for that discussion next. Prime Minister Mark Carney has returned from his European tour, part of his government's efforts to diversify Canadian trade beyond the U.S. But Conservatives say they're not seeing any concrete results from these actions and that Carney hasn't lived up to his campaign promises to Canadians.
He campaigned on, we'll have our elbows up, we're going to drop our gloves when someone challenges us. But every single decision that Prime Minister Carney has made since the campaign has been completely the opposite. He has given many concessions to the Americans, yet it is unclear whether we've gotten anything in return.
The Power Panel joins me now. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communications strategist and co-host of the Beyond a Ballot podcast. James Moore is a former Conservative cabinet minister, and Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. Hi, guys. Nice to see you all.
Hey, JP.
Amanda, jump in on that clip from Adam Chambers. What do you say to him?
Well, I mean, I think that the Prime Minister has been really clear, hasn't deviated one bit from the promise and commitment that he made to Canadians about strengthening and deepening the ties, diversifying the ties, the partnerships and relationships to rely less on the U.S. So while those talks continue with the U.S., his trip to Europe is really illustrative of the commitment that he's made. And that's to look at some of our strategic ties in areas like security, defense, trade, resource sectors, develop and build those global partnerships during this really shifting geopolitical dynamic and time. So, I mean, I think it's a small-minded approach when you think that we should just take the lame duck, we should sit idly by and wait for the U.S. trade negotiations with somebody who is completely unpredictable and not get out into the world and look at strengthening and deepening the ties the way that he has. And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, whether it's the security commitments in Ukraine or the deepened ties in Poland, in trade, cybersecurity, clean energy, or looking at potential energy partnerships with Germany, like all of the things that happened this week was really illustrative and really promotes the commitment that he's made to Canadians.
Yeah, James, I take the point that we don't really have a lot of concrete details on what was accomplished this week, but it's not like nothing was accomplished. We certainly have a better relationship with Germany, Poland, and Latvia than we did at the start of the week, right? This trip was fairly successful from that point of view. And then if you're a proponent of liquefied natural gas, you have to be feeling better about the prospects of that in this country based on the comments from the Prime Minister and Tim Hodgson, the Natural Resources Minister. They're saying there's enormous possibilities there after meeting with the Europeans. What's your assessment of this trip?
True. The viability of LNG through northern Manitoba, though, is in question. But look, it was more than 10 years ago that Stephen Harper signed the Canada-Europe Free Trade Agreement, and it takes a long time to build economic ties across the Atlantic Ocean. You know, the United States works very well for us economically. We speak the same language. North-south infrastructure routes have existed for a long time, business supply chains, all that stuff. So you know, when we signed the Free Trade Agreement, as I said, more than a decade ago, we had a lot of interruptions. You know, Stephen Harper had a pretty aggressive plan to try to build those relationships with Europe, but they were interrupted by his defeat in 2015, by COVID in 2020, and Donald Trump's election in 2016, and then now his reemergence in 2024. So now this kind of, a decade later, we're actually trying to get some benefits of that economic arrangement so that we can create Canadian jobs through world sales into the European market, which is a phenomenal opportunity for Canada. But Adam Chambers is right about the short-term reality that Canadians are starting to get increasingly anxious and nervous about the Canada-U.S. relationship. And the Prime Minister has an obligation to build out our relationship with Europe, and that's good. But I think Canadians are increasingly worried and anxious about what's going on with the United States and wanting to see some deliverables and some action. I imagine the Prime Minister will probably have some announcements very soon about some projects that are going to be good for the country. But this balance between the Canada-U.S. relationship, the Canada-Europe relationship, is a tough one for any Prime Minister to manage, but it's right for the opposition to raise appropriate questions.
Shachi, you did some polling in June, and it showed 64% of Canadians were very confident the Prime Minister could strengthen relationships with like-minded nations. Do you think that he delivered on those expectations this week?
Well, I think what Canadians expect now is some homework to be turned in, some things that demonstrate, you know, they were quite happy at the beginning of the summer, JP, to give him this summer to get a plan together. And that plan didn't just include oil and gas, but it did include that. It included diversifying and trying to find new trading partners. It talked about finding new markets for our resources. His words, he wanted to build, baby, build. Oh, and there's that little thing called a budget that is still due. So, you know, it's like when you're in one of these, we're heading into back to school season, when you're in one of these, you know, masochistic over the summer English programs and your teacher gives you all the books, and now it's the last week of August and you're desperately trying to get all your book reports in. What is going to happen? I think we're going to start to see a little bit of softening in terms of where Canadians are at. They're still very much on the Prime Minister's side, but that is predicated more by an antipathy towards Donald Trump than it is by a sense that, yes, we have seen the proof points now and we're satisfied with what's being done. And it's really hard when you're in government because incremental work isn't always as satisfying as saying, here's the thing, it's all done, it's gift wrapped, it's delivered. So it's going to get more challenging for the Prime Minister as we come back and as Parliament resumes and as you have a rejuvenated opposition leader who's going to really try to put the feet to the fire to the feet of the Prime Minister and basically say, hey, what have you done? And, you know, we need to see more than words at this point. So, you know, two things can be true at the same time. He has done some work, but at the same time, I think there's going to be pressure, a lot more pressure to see things completed.
Amanda, how do you feel about the state of Canada-U.S. talks? We know that Dominic LeBlanc, the U.S. Trade Minister, was in Washington. He had some productive conversations with his American counterpart. But he did leave a little early, right? He left on Wednesday instead of yesterday. Do you think that that is a reason to be worried?
Well, I mean, I have the same information that we all have, and that was that the sources said that LeBlanc's meeting was supposed to be 60 minutes. It ended up being 90 minutes with Lutnick. They came out. There was this sense of optimism. They were really focused on sectoral tariffs that the U.S. has implemented, softwood, steel, aluminum, and everything that we heard coming out of it felt like things were headed in the right direction. So we can only take the word of those sources at this point. Obviously, Canadians are, I agree, anxious to get this deal done and looking ahead to the end of CUSMA and that entire trade negotiation. But I think that it's promising that the talks are ongoing, that our Canadian officials are coming back with a sense of optimism and conveying that to Canadians. I think that there's no reason to not believe that that's the course that we're headed in.
Yeah, James, our sources usually describe these meetings as productive. There was a new way to describe it yesterday. They called it, they're leaving Washington with prudent optimism about where things are at with the Americans.
Hey Siri, find a parallel word for progress. Look, they're talking. That's good. Doors aren't being slammed. That's good. They have a cordial relationship. That's good. But we are now 7 months into the Trump presidency, which is to say we have 41 months left. And sort of managing this relationship and actually having continued dialogue is actually a good thing. I think that the relevant strategy for this government is probably to play the long game and just to manage the Trump administration and all of its complexities and all of its sort of erratic behavior over the long term. And I think that Dominic LeBlanc being down there and meeting with folks is a good thing. And so, tomorrow you may have breaking news on a headline that things have gone completely pear-shaped. I don't know. I mean, it's the nature of the Trump presidency. But I think as long as there's dialogue, as long as it's courteous, and as long as it seems to be, substantive and not sort of ad hominem, I think that's a win.
Shachi, quick final thoughts to you on this one before we switch topics.
I mean, nothing more than I guess we're going to see. And, we don't know any more than we're going to find out. And at that point, Canadians will be able to judge what they think about the performance so far.
I want to switch to the discussion now because the Toronto Star is reporting two candidates are gearing up for a run for the NDP leadership. Alberta NDP MP Heather McPherson and BC activist and former NDP candidate Avi Lewis are jumping into the race to replace former leader Jagmeet Singh, which starts next week, if you can believe it. While neither candidate has officially declared their candidacy, the Star sources say they're gathering the nomination signatures. Amanda, what do you make of these two contenders?
Well, I mean, listen, it was interesting earlier today. We were talking about our own podcast and having someone from the NDP join us. And we're like, when is this leadership race happening? You know what the NDP need right now? They need a leader. So I think it's important that as we start talking about leadership candidate, it brings some of the spotlight back to the party. It allows the party to start debating what are they going to stand for? How are they going to resonate with Canadians? What's going to be the communication strategy to get more eyes on this party? This is no small task. I mean, sure, Sachi will tell us more about what the numbers look like, but they're at a fundraising deficit. They need to raise money. Leadership races tend to allow for some of this to happen. It puts a renewed interest in the party. It gets people, excited about potential directions of the party. They're already toying with new ideas, some fresh thinking. This is going to be critical to get them out of those single or maybe barely double-digit numbers that we're seeing in the polls.
Yeah, James, do you sense an opening here for the NDP? Because as Carney has been governing, it does seem like he is more, of a blue liberal, more of a progressive conservative, if you will. Certainly more to the center than Justin Trudeau ever was. Do you think that the NDP can pounce?
I think the NDP's challenge is less about the personality at the top. And these are two candidates, I know Abby Lewis, but, these are people who are, feisty partisan socialists who will make some noise, but probably not make a big electoral difference. And it's not necessarily their fault. I think the NDP made a strategic mistake years ago with Jagmeet Singh's leadership, but more beyond the personality, is to make a real shift away from, as we go into Labor Day weekend, the issues that are of dominant concern to working class Canadians, middle class voters. Their number one issue is not climate change. The number one issue is not gender identity. The number one issue is not Indigenous reconciliation. Important issues, of course, all, and certainly to progressive voters. But those are not the dominant issues of our time. They weren't when we were going through the crisis of cost of living and the inflation crisis. They weren't the dominant issues of concern when it comes to Donald Trump in 2016 or Donald Trump in 2024 and the couple of years that we have still in front of us. And until the NDP gets back to sort of core issues of economic security, standing up for the little guy, those old issues that Ed Broadman back in the day used to always talk about. People who get up for work in the morning in the dark and come back from work in the dark, who scrape the ice off their windshield in the morning, who are worried about getting a good fair wage for a good hard day's work, who want to make sure that criminals are held accountable, who want to bargain collectively and make sure that the government has their back when it comes to the social programs that they may need at the end of their lives. Like those core issues of economic security, the NDP stopped talking about those a long time ago, and they focused more on culture politics and social issues that are not the dominant issues of today. And until they have that shift, I don't think they're going to be electorally particularly relevant for quite some time.
Shachi, what's the polling telling you?
Well, right now, only about 13% of Canadians say that they would consider the NDP in a future election. 13, 1-3. Yeah, wow. And I think even more demoralizingly for the NDP at this moment are the questions around the legacy of Jagmeet Singh and the future of the party. And you've got about 30% of people who voted NDP in the April election saying that they have big questions about the future of the party, whether they think it's dark and the party's best days are behind it. You've got about a third of that group saying so, and about fewer than half, I would say, based on our numbers, saying that no, we actually think among that group that the days of the party are bright, but that brightness is predicated on getting the right leader in place. And I would just pick up on what James said. If NDP voters themselves think it's about leadership, okay, but really it's also about, to his point, what does the party stand for in 2025? What will it stand for in 2029? We've seen rank and file NDP members, they dumped Tom Mulcair because he couldn't win an election. They eventually dumped Jagmeet Singh for delivering the worst electoral outcome for the party in more than a decade. But the speed of this leadership race, while it may re-inject and reignite some passion or some excitement, I don't know that it gives enough time for members themselves or would-be leaders to pause and say, look, where does the party really need to go?
13% is the potential pool of voters. Is that that's what we're talking about?
It is the rock solid pool. It is those who say that they would definitely consider the party. Now you've got, and I just want to contrast that against the 41% of the electorate who say there is no way I would consider the party in the next election. So it really does give us some pause around, are we going to continue to see the makings of a two-party system in Canadian politics over the long haul, or is there a way back for the NDP?
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you to the Power Panel, Amanda Alvaro, James Moore, and Shachi Kurl. Nice to see you all. Thanks for coming on. I'm JP Tasker, in for David Cochran. Thank you for watching Power in Politics. There's a lot more coming up on CBC News Network. Stay right there.